Of PodJam. Welcome to day 2 of PodJam 2021. We are creating some awesome resources for aspiring podcasters and also podcasters looking to level up. And we're starting off today with a live Behold Her interview with Theresa and Rachel McElroy. I am so excited and grateful to have them with us. A little bit of housekeeping up front. Speaking of the McElroy family, we have giveaways for every panel today. Every panel, keep an eye out for the mods instructions in chat. But we are giving away a copy of the McElroy's guidebook to creating podcasts. Everybody has a podcast except you. So look out for that info to enter that. And also, this entire event is fundraising for the Trevor Project. They do amazing work for LGBTQ plus youth, life-saving work. We've already raised $800 yesterday, and we're looking to smash our goal of $1,200 today. So if you learn something, if you get a laugh out of this interview, if you feel an emotion, donate $5. That's our recommended donation. Honestly, a steal to any convention. So thank you for joining us. But to get right to the interview and our lovely guests, let's just jump right into things. So, Theresa, Rachel, I would love for folks who are unfamiliar with you to first introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your podcast, your elevator pitch. And we'll start with Theresa.
Okay, so I'm Theresa McElroy. I am married to the middleest brother, Travis McElroy. And I actually have a background in musical theater. And so I guess I've been performing my whole life at this point. And I think that these days, if you're a McElroy, you have a podcast. So I think the way that I got into it was was I the last one to start, or did Wonderful start after us? Yeah. Okay. So Travis has always had more podcasts than he can count, coming in and out and in and out. And I actually got introduced to podcasts by Travis. They started Taz pretty much right after we got together. And we spent a long time trying to find a good fit for us. And finally settled on a kind of infotainment genre of etiquette and manners. And I mean, we like to say that it's not like which knife and fork to use etiquette. It's more like a step-by-step kind of guide of how to navigate the world, kind of thing. And Schmanners was born. I played the straight man, the teacher, and and Travis is the goofball, as usual.
I feel like there's one episode that's particularly relevant to a lot of the folks listening. There's one about how to do art commissions, as well as sort of
that one.
Yeah, as well as like a history of art commissions. But yeah, that one's great in education for sure. Rachel, what about you?
Hi. So Griffin is my husband. He is the youngest of the McElroys, and we started our podcasting together with a show called Rose Buddies, which was just kind of a bachelor/reality dating show recap podcast. And I kind of thought about it in the context of Sydney and Theresa, who were both doing these podcasts where they were talking about topics they had some expertise. And I thought, well, what do I know a lot about? And at the time I was like, I have watched a lot of seasons of The Bachelor and Bachelorette. So we started doing that show, and then it just became less and less fun to talk about, just kind of as we realized all the problematic aspects of those podcasts and just reality dating shows in general. And we realized what we really like doing, and what, I think our listeners really enjoy, is when we talk about things we're excited about. So we shifted, and now we do Wonderful, which every week we talk about topics, music, movies, books, just particular pieces of nostalgia and that, excite us. And hopefully our listeners, can learn something new or find out about something they didn't know about before.
My favorite episode includes the wombat.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah,
love that one.
kind of a seminal, wonderful episode. Yeah, and that, I mean, that kind of speaks to just our level of interest week to week and how we kind of shift topics. I think part of the reason that I was drawn to Griffin was his just kind of general enthusiasm for things. And it is not something that comes naturally to me always. I tend to be more of kind of like a skeptic and kind of practical. And so it's hard for me sometimes to just let go and say, you know what, I really love like goldfish crackers. But Griffin kind of brings that out in me, and I feel like that's kind of the energy of our show.
What a pick-me-up of a podcast, it sounds like. So you both touched on this a little bit, but in case there's anything you wanted to expand on, I was wondering like where your love of podcasts comes from. It sounds like it comes with the territory of being a McElroy. Was it something you were interested in beforehand, or what were your thoughts on podcasts before you started podcasting? Were they just like a thing that your husband or partner did? I'm curious.
Well, I guess I'll go first. I really didn't know anything about it. I was familiar with audiobooks, and just figured that it was kind of like internet radio that people published weekly or whatever. I really wasn't aware of just the breadth of topics that were available and how you could really almost develop, this little friend in your ear to be with you while you, I don't know, I did a couple of I did a year or so of dog walking in LA. And so I always just had one on, and it was nice to not feel so, just alone in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Rachel, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I had been listening to podcasts before we did one. Actually, it's interesting. Griffin and I have a mutual friend, and before I even met Griffin, our mutual friend was like, "Oh, you should listen to this podcast my friend does called My Brother and Me." And so before I met Griffin, I'd actually listened to some episodes of that. And then after I met him, I listened to the whole back catalog. Uh, but yeah, that and This American Life, of course, a lot of the really early kind of trailblazers that may have started out as radio shows, for example, and then kind of moved into more of the podcast space. And I don't know, I think like Theresa, it's just nice to have company when you're doing something else. When I was working at a previous jobs, I did a lot in spreadsheets, and it was just nice to like have something to listen to. It made the time go faster and made me kind of enjoy my day more.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I love about podcasts, and it's depending on the genre of podcast you pick, it's just like listening to a conversation with friends in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, great for keeping you company while you multitask, especially. So then how did you go from listening to these podcasts to creating your own podcast? Theresa, you touched on it a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can get like real specific about how your current podcast came to be.
Well, I think that we really took our time with it. Sawbones had been going for a very long time, which is Justin and Sydney's medical podcast. Medical comedy podcast. And I love their show. I have listened from day one. And we kept kind of circling around what should we do, what would we talk about. And it really took a lot of trial and error. Not that we recorded a bunch of things that we had to delete and never do, but more like oh, should we talk about this? Should we talk about that? Should we do TV? Should we do and it just took a long time to figure out what is something that we can talk to each other about every week for the foreseeable future
Mm-hmm.
and have a great time doing. Um, and we finally settled on the same sort of infotainment that I love, the podcast, the Sawbones style. Um, with the things that I love to do. I love letter writing and I love like vintage clothes and I love um like weird Victorian documentaries and things like that. And Travis is really great at going along for the ride. So um when we would go on vacation, we would visit like historical things and uh just really have a fun time, almost like, learning together. It seems very niche, very nerdy, but I think that it really is something. There's a reason why the History Channel and why like these different documentaries on music and history and the wars and all this kind of stuff. There's a reason why people make that, and we love to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really how it came about. But we had to decide that this was something we could talk about, like I said, every week for the foreseeable future. And this is what we settled on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great tip as well for folks in the chat who are aspiring to be podcasters and kind of trying to figure out what exactly their niche will be. It has to have longevity if you want the project to have longevity. If this is a short-term thing and you're okay with that, I suppose that's a different thing. I'm curious, do any ideas come to mind where you or Travis pitched it and one of you thought, oh, this would be great, that you ended up not pursuing?
There are a lot of biographical episodes that we kind of toss out. Um, and the thing is, looking backward on people in their time and what they did is a very kind of like sensitive thing, because as we learn and grow as humans, we change and society changes. So there are a bunch of people who at the time were like, Victorian influencers or whatever, um that we just don't find anything other than the fact that they influenced culture to be really relevant for today. And so a lot of those biographies we just can't seem to find a good common ground on. So
Mm-hmm.
those stay in the idea bin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Rachel, what about you? How did Wonderful? I mean, you gave us a little bit of the overview, but how did it come to be?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know that I ever would have thought of it if I hadn't kind of married into the family. I'm not a performer. I'm not kind of a stage person. I mean, I like to be funny and I like to be entertaining, but I never really saw myself kind of trying to get attention that way. But I think, it, what's nice about doing the show with somebody that you trust and that you have chemistry with and that has, maybe a little more showmanship than you do is it's not stressful. The kind of the stage fright thing that would get me otherwise doesn't in this case. Because I know, like, if there is any slack, my partner will pick it up. And so I don't feel that pressure to, like, bring in all the laughs. And I will say too, trying to figure out kind of what you can bring, that maybe other people aren't saying, or something unique. One thing that really took off for me that was kind of a surprise is, my background. I majored in English literature and then specifically in creative writing was my emphasis. And then I went to graduate school and studied English literature again, got a master's in humanities, and focused a lot on poetry. And it just started happening that week to week I would talk about a different poet or poem, thinking like, I don't know, this is probably something that people aren't running into anywhere else. And it is something that I feel strongly about and that I have some background in. And people really enjoyed it. I think largely because they weren't getting it anywhere else, and my enthusiasm for it kind of caught on. And it made me realize, like, oh, you have to find the things that you care about that maybe people wouldn't find otherwise. Like, why are you the right person to be talking about this? I think a lot of times, for example, when we were doing The Bachelor and Bachelorette, we thought like, oh, we have funny things to say, and a lot of people watch the show. But ultimately, I don't think we were the right people to be doing that podcast, because I think after a while it just started to feel like work. And I think we realized like, oh, you know what? Like what we really have is enthusiasm for a lot of the same things, but this is not one of them anymore. So it was nice to be able to pivot, and the Max Fun Network was really generous in letting us do that.
Well, that makes me very happy that you found yourself into a podcast where you can genuinely just be very excited and passionate about what you're genuinely excited and passionate about, and how much that shines and resonates for people. I'm also going to pause here and say that we hit $900 in donations. So big thank you to Danielle and the Muffin Man for making that happen. I'll also call out, both of you mentioned host dynamics, which I think is, I guess, another tip or something to consider for folks looking to get into podcasting. Having a partner to do that with, I think, is lovely both for yourself and often for listeners, because you have someone to play off of, and your personalities and what you naturally bring to the microphone are going to play off of each other as well. So I'm really glad that you both brought that up. So my next question is, as you were going into these, at the time, new podcast ventures, did you have expectations of what hosting or producing a podcast would be like?
I guess for me, um I didn't know the first, like, I still don't know a single thing about producing a podcast. I am basically just a performer, and I hand it to Travis. And also, we also now are so fortunate that we are able to employ people to also help with things like editing and posting and recording. And when we had done touring, we had a tour manager and all that stuff. So I had never even thought about that side of it. I was like, okay, we put it in the computer, it's done. um but I guess as far as hosting goes, it really is it, I would have to say, okay, this is what I mean. So when you are podcasting together, just the two of you in the room, I think that has a certain type of intimacy that you are like, the audience is a third person, right? So you want to try and talk to each other while including the audience. But when you have a live show, I think that the audience is less included. Almost, they're there, and you can certainly feed off like laughs and stuff, but the intimacy is gone, I think. And so that would be the two parts of post hosting that I didn't really expect to be so different. um we've Travis and I have changed our setup over the years, and we used to actually look at each other while we were talking, like facing each other across a table. And it just became too like insular. We were not able to like complete our thoughts because we know each other so well. So we were there was like the understood, the implied finish of a thought, Whereas if we finally now have come to where we always sit next to each other. And we can definitely turn to talk, right? Turn to each other like that. But we do it more so that we think a little more about the third person, the audience.
Mhm. What an interesting, like a small change, but it sounds like it's really, really shifts how you feel as you're recording.
I think that also is kind of the style of the infotainment that we do,
Mhm.
because it's not like you're listening in on our conversation. It's more like we are all talking about this thing together.
That's a great tip. Rachel, what about you?
Uh, s- so one thing that has been really nice is we have always had a really active community, and we took a lot of our community from Rose Buddies kind of along with us. And so there's a Facebook group, and a lot of times it uh, sparks a lot of conversation. You know, we'll talk about a particular thing from our childhood, and everybody will get excited and start talking about it in the Facebook group. And so that has helped me really think about the audience. I also, for a living, I'm a grant writer for a community college. And so it's not unusual for me to think about the audience for what I'm writing. So I found myself a lot of times thinking, like, okay, is this interesting to me? Is it going to be interesting to somebody who's listening? Is it funny? You know, like, is it, you know, it's hard sometimes when you're trying to be informative and funny, because a lot of times you'll forget about one or the other while you're doing it. And so for me, I always have to think about funny, um, because I know when we first started doing the show, I would have my notes and I would feel so beholden to my notes. And I felt like I'm going to get through this and they're not going to know what year this guy died. And then it was like, oh, nobody cares. Like nobody, nobody really cares. And I was always surprised at the end of an episode when people wouldn't be like, well, actually, like, because the people that listen to our show listen because they're just enjoying our dynamic, and maybe they're learning about something that they're going to look into more after the episode, but they're not listening, you know, like it's NPR, you know, like they're listening like it's a comedy show on a network that has a lot of comedy shows. um and you know, they're just enjoying our dynamic. So that was something about hosting I really had to remind myself, like, listen to what Griffin is saying, because sometimes he is making a joke. And it is appropriate for you to add to or respond to that joke. And also, nobody really cares, like, if you get all the important dates, or, you know, like the names of all their children or where they were born, or, you know, it's more about being excited and like collaborating with your co-host.
Yeah, that's so you brought up something that I'm curious about with both of you. So what do your notes or preparation look like as you're getting ready for an episode? Do you like you mentioned you're looking for things that are both informative and funny. So is it like you have a fact and do you have to note that, like, do you write your jokes ahead of time or what is your process?
So for me, Uh, mm, I mean, I think a lot about timing. So I think about how long our episode is, and whether or not the amount of information I have is going to make an episode. You know, I think we started doing a segment at the beginning called Small Wonders, which is just kind of a one shot. Like, here's a thing that I like this week that we know isn't really enough for a whole episode because there's just not enough rich history or interaction or information available. Uh, but when we decide on a topic, we'll both kind of look and make sure there's, like, you know, there's something happening around it that creates a story, that, you know, that it's appropriate for us to be talking about it. Because a lot of times you'll think like, oh, this is great, and then you'll look up the context and you're like, oh no, I should never talk about that. That's terrible.
Yeah. That happens a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. uh and Griffin's been really, really good. Like that's the other thing that's nice about having somebody that has the expertise is a lot of times I'll sit down and I'll be like, should I do this? And he's like, you're asking that question and that kind of is your answer right there. The answer is no. Because, I think when your job is to like entertain people and to be enthusiastic, you don't want to talk about something that is going to bum people out for a variety of reasons. So yeah, usually I'll look. Sometimes it's just like one really good article. If I have a topic and I find a really good story on like a news site about it, that's enough. Sometimes I have to go to multiple sources to find enough pieces to put together a whole segment. Um, Sometimes I will find something that I think I could maybe talk about this, and then I read it and I realize I do not have the background or the expertise necessary. Like sometimes like I'm really interested in like parts of the human body, and it's like, oh, wouldn't it be great to talk about how the tongue works? And then I'm like, no, I can't pronounce half of these words. So yeah, so it's just kind of finding that right balance of like, does this kind of fit within the parameters of our podcast, and is there enough there to talk about, and is it going to be like entertaining, or is it going to be really dry, and should I maybe not do a whole episode about it? So yeah.
Theresa, what about prep for you?
Um, well, so I am very fortunate that I have a research assistant. We go through topics together that are usually listener submitted at this point. Everybody has been really great about, sending in things that they would be interested in. We go through topics, and I have my favorite kind of like online etiquette blogs to check. And when it comes to things that are like wearing white after Labor Day, like silly things like that, there is a lot of like actual book resources that I own. I have several editions of Emily Post's books and Miss Manners books, and you can always look through uh, Dear Abby and Miss Manners. They both have like syndicated columns, so it's pretty easy to find their answer. If you're looking for something especially witty, I recommend Miss Manners. But we tend to do a kind of chronological approach. A lot of the things we talk about are culturally related. They have tradition and roots, and why we do the things that we do today, or why we don't do that thing anymore, is really historical. And so we tend, it feels like a running gag at this point. We start with the ancient Egyptians, and we move on to the Greeks and Romans, and then we go into the medieval period, and all that kind of stuff. So chronologically really helps me organize my thoughts around the subjects. And Alex is really great about building a chronological narrative with me. Um, and then really I have to say that a lot of the stuff that we'll do, like our like tips and tricks or whatever, what podcast like etiquette do's and don'ts, a lot of them come directly from the Emily Post Institute. um, and a lot of them, I mean, we've even used things like BuzzFeed articles uh, that have just, they have a way of working through like how the current culture views specific like manners and traditions. And then Travis and I talk a lot about our own experience, usually at the end of the podcast, where we take listener submitted questions on the topic. And as we've gone further and further through, I find that there's a lot less, especially with Travis and I giving our putting our 2 cents on top. There's a lot less of this is exactly the way you should do it. Here are the steps, and more like everybody's just trying to figure this thing out as they go. And I think a really great example is all of our wedding etiquette episodes, We're like, there are so many wedding traditions, and sure, they're traditions. Lots of people have done them, but just because people did them doesn't mean you have to do them.
Mhm.
Um, and that seems to be a kind of recurring theme these days, where we just talk about, well, this is what everybody's done, but do we really have to do it that way, as long as we are, kind to each other, and as we keep these other kind of like social, like moral statutes in mind? Why do we have to do it like that? And the answer is we don't.
Mhm. It sounds like both of you, over the course of these podcasts or previous ones like Rose Buddies, have really grown as hosts. So I'm curious, what tips do you have for folks on being a vibrant host or developing your own host style?
I mean, I mentioned it earlier, but just really think about kind of what you're good at. I think, and this is something you hear from creators all over the place, is that when you first start out, you're kind of trying to be like somebody that you like, or you're trying to be like something you've heard, or you're trying to follow a model that you think is successful. And then over time, you kind of figure out, well, wait, what is my thing? And the sooner you can get there, I feel like the better, because I feel like people are really quick to read, any discomfort or insecurity you may have, and those moments where you're kind of being inauthentic. Like, I don't know what it is, but it just, like, us as human beings, it's just like immediately you're just like, oh, well, this person should not be doing this. And so I guess that would be kind of my biggest piece of advice, is just like, maybe it's talking to your friends or your family and saying, like, what is one of your favorite stories that I tell, or one of your favorite memories of me, like figuring out kind of what it is about you that people like, and that, where you really kind of shine, and focusing on that.
I think that it also has to do a lot with the partner that you choose. I mean, not everyone can podcast with their spouse. Um, but I do think that it is important that you have some kind of rapport, that you have some history, you have it, it I think that before you think about having a podcast, you need to think about having a relationship with the person. And I mean, obviously romantic is not necessary, but just a familiarity with the person you're podcasting with, so that you can trust them to make you look good. It helps that Travis and I both have theatrical backgrounds, and like one of the statutes of improv and theater is make your partner look good. Um, so I think that we are on the same page that way. And it's really important that if you are going to podcast with a partner or a group of people, that you all make sure you're on the same team.
Mhm. Is there anything else or any other lessons you've learned regarding hosting, regarding podcasting in general, as you've been working on these podcasts? Sort of 101 tips you would want to share with aspiring podcasters in the audience?
I would like to say that there is a little bit of a imposter syndrome that you really have
Mm.
to jump over, because when we first started, I did a lot of couching of like, oh, I'm not an expert, I didn't go to school for this, I don't have a degree, that kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is, I do enough research, I live in the world, I have enough experiences, and I genuinely enjoy what I talk about, that I become an expert. I don't have to tell people that I haven't been published, or that this is just my experience. I trust the audience to think of me as somewhat an authority on something. But also I think they trust me now, so that if something is factually incorrect, that they can say so and say, you said this thing, but that's not quite true. And I think that a big tip is to try and not take that personally. Um, but I I do the research. I read about it. I am an expert on that for that moment.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, any 101 tips from you?
Ah, I mean, I feel like I've kind of covered my biggest pieces of advice. I would just remember, that this is something that you're doing because you enjoy it, and if it gets to a point where you're not enjoying it anymore, like, you just pivot or find something that feels better. I think at the time when we switched from Rose Buddies to Wonderful, I think we were nervous about it and we knew we were going to lose a lot of listeners. But we also knew that we were not happy doing that previous show anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and since then, it's been great. Like, we always feel better recording and making the show, than we did before. And that's a great place to be in.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of pivoting, let's chat a little bit about the communities around your podcasts. I'm curious, how do you engage with your communities and your fans? I know, Theresa, you mentioned that you all get a lot of fan submissions for topics.
Absolutely. We always ask for anything that people are interested in if they want to send it in. We also rely a lot on Twitter, where we tell people ahead of time we're going to be doing a show uh, on dining etiquette. Send in your dining etiquette questions, and we'll see, and we'll try and answer them. Um, and I think that is something. I mean, it's a little bit of a shortcut in a way of like, we need to talk about stuff people are interested in. Let's have them tell us what they're interested in. But also it finds its way into the kind of, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that it creates something that people want to come back to.
Mm-hmm.
They say, okay, well, I have submitted like 6 topics so far. None of them have gotten in, but maybe this next one will. And they keep listening for that. Same thing where, when people tweet the questions for the shows, we say their Twitter handles and people feel like they're a part of the process. And that's really engaging for a lot of people.
Yeah. I feel like to have your favorite podcast notice you must feel really lovely. So I think that's a great way to engage with your community. Rachel, do anything to interact with fans?
Yeah, we do invite people to submit their own kind of wonderful things. We have an email address, and at the end of the show, we will sometimes read a submission from a listener of just like some very particular thing that they have appreciated. Whether it's just like crunchy leaves. I mean, it's like, it can be very small, and honestly, it's easier if it is
Lovely.
very small. And then also our Facebook group, as I mentioned, has become a really active community of people kind of lifting each other up and thinking of things that from the week, or, particular artists that they heard us mention on the show that they also like. And it's become nice. A lot of people have said that in their Facebook feed to have, updates from that group is nice, because it's just like a little like chunk of something like, cute or sweet or nostalgic that people are excited about at the time. And I don't know, it seems to really kind of keep people, uh, you know, in high spirits during this kind of difficult time.
I
Mm-hmm.
love the
We'll
selfie
see.
of the week
Oh,
thread that comes up from Wonderful all the time. Love
yeah,
it.
yeah, it's just it's incredible. It's never anything that we pushed. We weren't really trying to engage people in that way. The social media piece is not anything that we are driving. It is just kind of something that we have gained over time, and we just try and nurture it without being front and center.
I think that's really lovely, and that it's it shows how the concept for your podcast like really resonates with people, that they get so genuinely excited about it that they want to create. I think that's wonderful. A Green Merdragon has a related, really great question, which is especially for podcasts where, like Theresa, you specifically mentioned, it can feel very intimate, right? Like, how do you manage parasocial relationships and fans who feel like they are a part of your lives? Has that ever come up for either of you?
Um, I mean, it does come up a little bit. And the the way that I feel like I manage it personally is I have to think about, well, I also, as a person, have created parasocial relationships with people where, I watch the same TV shows over and over because they feel like my friends. And you see an actor in a show where you're like, oh, it's that person, even if they're not playing that character. Or, I mean, this has happened. Uh let's see, it's happened with like Chris Evans, right? Where he has portrayed Captain America so much throughout, our young adult, middle adult lives that he becomes associated with that character, but that's not him. He's not the living Captain America. It's not real, but in our minds they feel so close. And so I I feel like remembering that myself lets me give people a lot of grace when they do the same thing. Um, and I think that really the only thing that I can do is my best. And if it's not for someone else, they don't they don't have to have it, you know? And that's really where the disappointment happens, right? Because when someone tweets at you or makes a comment on the Facebook group or whatever, and says, this is bad, I hate it, you do a bad job, and I'm leaving, you just have to be like, okay, well, it's not for them, and that's not my fault. I'm going to keep doing what I do. And if people want to take it, it's there. And if they don't want to take it, they don't have to. That doesn't mean that I'm encouraging the anonymity of the internet to provide a mask for people to be like, you suck and you're terrible and I hope you fall off the planet, because I don't believe in that either. Uh, but I really just try to think about my own parasocial relationships with Captain America. And you know, and try to, like I said, give people a little bit of grace in that area.
Rachel, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I will just say it's kind of we're in kind of a unique situation because, Griffin and Justin and Travis kind of got in the game really early. And so our listeners have really kind of grown along with us, we've had kids, we've all moved to different places, and we talk about that on the show. We're thoughtful about what we share about our children, but it comes up. And so it is very natural, I think, for people to feel invested in what is happening with us because it is part of our shows. It's unavoidable. And so we just try to be thoughtful, that we want to create a community that is welcoming, but we are not looking for new siblings. We are not looking for new best friends, and being thoughtful about, of course we want to support people that enjoy the work and engage with us and tell us how important it is to them. Of course that's a wonderful thing about doing the show, and that's kind of why you get started in the first place. But remembering, that I don't know, that we have to be thoughtful about our own privacy and our own time and our own energy, that we put out into the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, setting those boundaries, I mean, setting boundaries in general in life, really great advice. So, what would be a favorite fan story of interacting with a fan in some way, either through social media or at an event?
Oh gosh. I think that when we have been fortunate enough to be invited on the Joko cruise, that is really sort of like the best interaction that I've ever had with fans. Travis and I, hosted an afternoon tea on the cruise ship. It was fantastic. It's a a service that the cruise ship offers anyway. They always offer, if you go to this certain room at the certain time, we will have tea, we'll have trays, you'll be able to have, your little finger sandwiches and jam tarts or whatever. And we just turned it into an amazing like schmanners party. It Everyone looked so beautiful. People got really into it. There were beautiful like modern outfits. There were really great some like vintage or reproduction outfits. There were some really great like even fanciful, beautiful outfits.
So
Uh
delightful.
it was wonderful, and we really all had a really great time, doing our best English tea time kind of impersonations. And it was so much fun. That's my favorite one, where we were able to walk around and talk to people and just kind of like be the ultimate hosts of this grand tea party. It was fantastic.
Oh, that sounds magical. Rachel, what would be your favorite fan moment?
I was trying to think about this. This was years and years ago, back before uh, Justin and Travis and Griffin started doing really large venues. We used to kind of hang around after the show, and the guys would, sign things and take pictures. And
Also before children.
yeah, true, true. I think we did that for a little while when Charlie, Sydney and Justin's oldest, was a baby, and then I think we quickly realized, like, because the venues got bigger, started to get later, and it was just not a commitment that could be sustained. But I was always surprised, because at that point Griffin and I had just started doing Rose Buddies, and honestly, it was just kind of delightful to have people recognize me and say how much they love the show, because I really wasn't anticipating that. I always kind of, and this speaks to the imposter syndrome that Theresa mentioned. I always kind of assumed people just wanted more Griffin, and I was there kind of along for the ride. And I'm not saying that to be like self-deprecating. It was just kind of, I recognized that people really loved Griffin, and here was another project that Griffin was doing. And obviously it brought a new dynamic to have his partner opposite him, but I just kind of thought, like, oh, people just want more Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
And they are getting that through this show. And so just any time anyone has ever been like, oh, you know what, you're my favorite part of the show, I'm always like, oh wow, thank you. Like, it still surprises me every time, and that is honestly always like a real special thing for me.
Oh, that's really sweet. I've definitely seen folks who are like, well, I don't want to bother the person. I don't want to like go up and say something. But if you're nice, especially if you recognize you only want to take a second of their time to say hi,
Mhm.
the few times someone has come up to me at like a tabletop convention and said something, I'm just like, thank you for making me look so cool in front of my friends.
Yeah.
So that's really lovely. We've just got 9 minutes left, so I think I'll ask as my last, like a very behold her question, which is if you could tell us a little bit about or what has your experience been specifically as a femme in the podcasting space?
Um I would like, I mean, as far as my experience goes, I really don't think that uh because podcasting is so like just me and Travis and we're doing it and we put it out into the world, that has been, I don't see any kind of like, I don't even think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to things like panels, uh or um or shows at like cons or whatever, which Travis loves to do, um I feel like it's kind of a lonely space at the moment. I've been on a couple of different panels where I've been the only person who was female presenting. Um, and I'm not saying that anyone like treated me badly or anything like that. It's just something where I've had to make my space,
Mm-hmm.
had to kind of like claim the microphone for when I wanted it, and no one was really thinking about actively including me, because I was quote included. I'm here, I'm sitting at the table, but I had to actively like push through a little bit. And I think that that was something, I wasn't exactly like surprised about, but also I would love to see things like a space made for people like me
Mm-hmm.
instead of having to like take it. And that's even with my like my privilege as like, you know, a young female white person. There just needs to be more space made for people, who don't fit like the typical white male gamer kind of
Mm-hmm.
internet person.
Yeah, right there with you. And I think the word you use, that it's a lonely space, I think is a really poignant one. I mean, it's lonely to feel like you're the one of anything in a group
Hmm.
of people. Rachel, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Teresa really said it well. Yeah, I will say the expectations are just a little different. You know, I think when I first started doing the show, we got several comments from people that were like, I didn't expect Rachel to be funny. You know, like it was interesting to just kind of get that like, oh, what a delightful surprise that is. Uh which was kind of jarring for me, and reminded me like in this creative space, like there are still a lot of stereotypes about, what I don't know what men do, and what everybody else does. And so I don't know. I think you just have to work harder. It's just like any other space. You hear about this a lot. It's just you have to work harder and you have to earn it more. And it's very easy to kind of just take that for granted. I always really appreciate when people draw attention to that, because I feel like you get so used to it at a certain point,
Mm-hmm.
you're just like, oh, I mean, I'm gonna have to earn the respect, and then you have to be reminded, like, but some people don't have to do that, and you're like, oh yeah, that would be nice, I guess.
Any words of advice to aspiring podcasters who are femme in the audience for getting into podcasting?
um I think my advice would be, because in our society, femme is often synonymous with smaller, with quieter, with, you know, delicate. I would say that it doesn't have to be, and you don't have to put those on if that's not you. And in fact, you may want to like explore other qualities of your femme self, um because femme can also be strong, can also be loud, can also be, whatever we want it to be. And those are voices that we want to hear too.
Absolutely. Being unapologetically yourself. Anything to add, Rachel?
No, that was perfect.
Well, on that lovely note, I hope that some folks in the chat got some encouragement if that was needed. But we're going to wrap up this interview. We'll go in backwards order. If folks can do some outros, let folks know where they can find you, plug your podcasts again if you'd like. We'll start with Rachel.
Well, yeah, the podcast is wonderful. It is on the Max Fun Network, but you can find it anywhere you download podcasts. Comes out typically on Wednesday each week. And I am on Twitter. I think I think my Twitter username is Rachel C. McElroy.
I've typed it so many times this week. That's what it is.
Okay, good. You can see how often I promote that I had no idea. And I guess that would probably be where I am most active. I'm not on TikTok. And I post on Instagram approximately once every 4 months. So yeah, Twitter would probably be the way to go.
Theresa. I'm going to say, let's see, everyone should check out McElroy.family. All of our shows are linked on there. There's tons of merch and announcements. And I mean, we have a YouTube video channel and all that stuff available there at McElroy.family. You can submit a topic for Schmanners if you email schmannerscast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at schmannerscast. Again, I never tweet. So I think my handle is Theresa Mcelroy at Theresa Mcelroy. But Schmanners Cast is really where we do all of our stuff on Twitter. Let's see. You can join our Facebook group. I have nothing to do with it, but there are lots of wonderful people out there in the Facebook world doing giving and getting excellent advice from other Schmanners fans. That's Schmanners Fanners on Facebook.
Amazing.
So I think that's all of my plugs.
Right. And I am Lisa Penrose. You can find me personally at Lisa Penrose in all of the places, basically. I would love if you also threw a follow over at Penwitch Studio over on Twitter. We are a podcast network looking to elevate fresh voices into the realm of geeky podcasts. So definitely check us out. Stick around for the rest of Pod Jam. We have 4 more wonderful events happening today. Coming up next in about 15 minutes is going to be Geeking Out about geek culture commentary panel. We have 3 sets of co-hosts, so 6 folks from Girls Can't Geek, Fake Geek Girls, and Femsplained talking about how they do commentary. I personally cannot wait for this panel. I can't wait to tune in. And we are raising funds for the Trevor Project. So if you learned something on this panel, Theresa and Rachel dropped so many amazing wisdoms, consider donating $5 to the Trevor Project. Mods will drop the donation link in the chat. We'll see you in 15 minutes. Everybody go get some water. Refresh your snacks. Bye, everybody.